Hello and welcome back to another episode of One of a Kind You. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in this week. And we are in for a special treat. You do not have to listen to me blab away by myself because we have Alicia Lyons with us. She is an intuitive coach who helps moms on their mom journey, specifically with letting go of that mom guilt. And there's Franklin chiming in his 2 cents. And I actually had the pleasure of chatting with Alicia on her podcast called Imperfect Mommying. And after that, I was like, oh my gosh, you have to come on my podcast because we just felt like we could chat with each other literally for hours. But in podcast land, we had to keep it down, like half hour, 40 minutes at the most. And so we just felt like what a perfect way to continue the conversation and have her here with us today. So what I know about Alicia is that she is a mom coach. She has a son who's 13. She has fur kids too. And she also has, in addition to her podcast and Perfect Mommying, she is also a published author. And so if I'm missing anything, Alicia, please fill us in.
I mean, I'm an award-winning cross stitch person.
That's cool.
Yeah, I've been cross stitching since I was 12 years old, and I like last year I think was the first time that I submitted. I'm pretty sure there's nobody else that cross stitches, so it's a default winning best of show, but I don't care. I'm taking the win.
Take the win. And it's so funny because I just for Christmas got a cross stitching set and I have not cracked it open yet because I've not cross stitched. I don't know where to begin with cross stitching. And I'm like, what YouTube video in YouTube land is going to be the go-to source for me? But I actually, ladies and gentlemen, just found my go-to source. So Alicia, when I'm blowing you up, it's because I have no idea what I'm doing. And you're gonna be like,
It's
oh
my
my God,
fault. Okay.
block.
It's so funny you say that because I've actually thought about creating a YouTube channel for cross stitching. So part of my story, which is not, part of my career or anything, but I've been a surrogate, and I've been a surrogate 4 times, 5 babies,
Wow.
birthed 6 in total, including my son. And the most recent babies were twins,
Wow.
and I'm just about wrapping up the Christmas stocking, which is kind of my specialty. I like making stockings for people. And so I'm finishing up the first one for the first baby. I just ordered the second one for the second baby because I had ordered both and I don't like the second one right now.
Oh.
So it's an addiction. It's okay.
Yes, so I'm hoping to get on the addiction train. And if you start the channel, I will be your first subscriber.
Awesome. Sounds like a plan.
Fantastic. So I did not realize, so I saw on your website that you do have a book about surrogacy, and I thought, that's interesting. I wonder what made her write the book about surrogacy, and now I know. And so I have one other person in my life who I know has been a surrogate, and she was a college friend who lived in New Hampshire, and she was a surrogate for the same couple 2 times. So she has 3 children of her own, and then she did surrogacy twice for this couple. And I just thought that was like the most incredible thing ever, because I don't know that I could mentally do it knowing like carrying the baby and then well, I guess that's the thing is like that you keep the mindset that it's not your baby, you're just helping
Mhm.
someone else have their baby. So could
That's the thing that I hear the most is like, oh, I couldn't do it because of that. And that's part of why I wrote the book, because there's lots and lots of questions that come up for people when you hear about surrogacy. And so I wrote down all the questions and then I answered them. And that book is coming out on March 11th,
Oh, that's
2025.
interesting. So right around the corner. So what I know this is not the plan that we talked about. Like we were talking about mom guilt. So we'll talk about that too, but what drew you to surrogacy?
It's kind of funny because my a girlfriend of mine in high school was like, I want to be a mom, but I don't want to give birth because we were talking about how there was this rumor that the worse your period cramps are, the worse your labor is. And
Uh-huh.
from interviews of different women, I've noticed that to be true. And I didn't have really bad period cramps, and I wanted to experience pregnancy, and I was like, I don't really want to be a mom. My
Oh,
son loves when I say that. So I was like, I'll have a baby for you. Before I even knew surrogacy was a thing, and then when I went through my divorce, I was self-employed, but I'd also gone through a divorce before where I was self-employed, and I knew how well I worked while not feeling great about myself. And so I was looking for a way to supplement my income. And I looked at Craigslist. That's how long ago this was.
Uh-huh.
Um, and there was an ad for to be a surrogate. And I reached out to them. I met them in June. Well, and my son's dad was like, yeah, you can't do that. And I was like, okay. So then we got divorced or we split up in May. I contacted them in June. I was matched with parents in July, meds in August, pregnant by September. Like
Wow.
that's just the kind of person I am. If I really want to do something, then and there's nothing stopping me, then I'll go do it. No holds barred. So
Yeah.
um, that was my first journey, and I don't want to set the expectation that that's what every single journey is going to be like, because they have not all been that way. But
Yeah.
it, I think, the universe had my back because I needed the income at that point, and that was a big driving factor. But
Mhm.
the that first experience wasn't an experience that, like, deep down I wanted. I didn't have any idea of what I wanted surface level, like deep down at that point. But the more that I did it, it kind of refined what I actually wanted. And I wanted this relationship with the parents or with the mom, with the kids, where I just kind of got updates at the very minimum.
Mhm.
Um, and the last two, I've really gotten that. And the twins are just the cutest things that ever lived. And I can't wait to see them grow up.
That's amazing. And so, what is the journey like for your son? What does he think? Like, does he see them as like pseudo siblings or like pseudo like cousins? Or is he kind of just like, "Oh, okay, mom's surrogate, like being a surrogate again?"
A little bit of both. When I gave birth to the first boy, I've only had one boy besides my son. When I gave birth to him, he had a real connection. He knew that I was pregnant before I did,
Oh,
or
really?
before I told him anyway. And um, and so he was really connected, and he always wanted siblings. So it is kind of hard for him, speaking of mom guilt. Um, so it's a little bit hard for him that, I'm willing to have a baby for someone else, but I'm not willing to have another one of my own. And it's like totally different story, dude.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Perspective of like an adult and then this perspective of a kid. It's like the kid who's like, 5 years old and they're like, I want a baby sister, baby brother, and have a baby. And it's like they don't really understand like all that comes with having babies like of our own.
I also know what it's like to have a sibling when you're 8 years older than said sibling, and it's not fun when you were the baby. And now you have a sibling that you have to share mom's attention with.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, and my girls are only 3 years apart, and we still have that same dynamic sometimes. So, splitting like my husband and I are still married, but like there are times where like my 15-year-old just had her friend party for her birthday on Sunday. And I said, "Are you including your sister? Because I booked the party for 18 girls and only 12 are coming." And she was like, "No." And I was like, "Well, that's not kind." She was like, "I didn't go to her party." And I was like, "Yeah, but you were offered and invited to go." She was like, "But I didn't want to." And I was like, "Okie dokie, here we go. Here we go."
Yeah.
And I know like part of it's also like a little bit of girl drama. But
Mhm.
yes, we have that dynamic sometimes of like, why can't I just do something? Like, why does the other always have to tag along? And it's like because we're a family unit. That's why. But I did say to my husband, we're like at the age now where they're going to have to split off and like Lily's gonna have to do things with just Lily's friends, and Casey's gonna have to do things with just Casey's friends, and there's gonna have to start being that disconnection because they are 15 and 12.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also had a sibling that was 8 years older than me. So
Uh,
I got the dynamic of both sides.
Yeah, so you were
My
that
poor
big,
stepmom,
you know?
kids 16 years apart. But yeah, like that was that. So I'm very familiar with that.
Yeah.
And so, he got to hold that baby.
Uh-huh.
And then when we had the twins, he had the opportunity to hold them, but he was a little more nervous about it.
Yeah.
And then after we got home, he's like, "Man, I wish I had held the babies." And I'm like, "Well, they're not babies anymore. They're two. Like they're running around, dressing up as owls for Halloween, and I'm here for it."
Yeah, yeah, I love it. And so, but now that it's like 2 is fun because like now you can do things like you can run and jump and climb and play. And you don't have to like they're not so fragile anymore. So that's like the fun. 2 is such a fun age.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think when we next visit, I think she'll come down and see me. It helps that she's local. Not all the parents have been local. She's, 3 hours away. That's local to California. Um,
Mhm.
and the other parents have been from Spain and the Philippines, and so I have the most contact with the mom from the Philippines.
Wow. So that's interesting that they had an American woman for surrogacy when they live in a foreign country. I guess it's like,
It is illegal in some countries.
oh, it is. Wow.
Spain, yeah, for sure. And I think both actually, Spain and Philippines, it's illegal to be a surrogate.
Wow.
Surrogacy isn't necessarily illegal, but yeah.
Wow. Wow, it's such like we could talk for the whole like days about this because this topic fascinates me. Um,
Mhm.
but so let's steer gears and like get back on track with mom guilt. So like you mentioned a little bit of the mom guilt with like not giving your son a biological sibling of his own. But I feel like that's just one of the many things, the many ways that mom guilt creeps into our daily existence. Um, so do you find yourself having mom guilt a lot, or is it that you just have had it in the past and you know how to work through it so you can help others do it too, or
The
both?
latter. I used to have a lot of guilt just
Yeah.
all the time. I think I learned it from my mom. She, feels guilty about everything. And when he was younger, I had a situation where I left him with a babysitter and she wasn't appropriate with him. And we went through all the channels of like filing a police report and child protective services and all that kind of stuff. And nothing came of it.
Mm,
And so I felt like had there been justice, then the guilt wouldn't have been there.
mhm,
But without the justice, there was like failure on my part times two. And so it I didn't even realize that until probably last year that was the catalyst, that there was no justice.
mhm,
And but I remember on Facebook long before I even thought about being a coach, that maybe he was 3 weeks old, and I posted, "Man, mom guilt is real."
yes.
And not understanding, I don't think we understand as moms the gravity of mom guilt and the way that it can really not only affect your relationship with your children, with your spouse, but how it affects your body. I'm literally listening to a book right now that talks about, the chemicals that get produced. And the more you feel guilty, the more your body craves the feeling of feeling guilty. It's
Yeah.
actually kind of fascinating. And that was the example that he gave was guilt. And I was like, ooh, interesting that it's like that's your topic. Okay, cool. Um, and when I let go of that guilt that I was holding, carrying around for 2, maybe 3 years, number one, it felt like 50 pounds of just awfulness had been lifted from my shoulders. And the other thing that I realized was how it was making me kind of push my son away because I have the mechanism of um, I'm going to leave you before you have the chance to hurt me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I had imagined that one day this child that I love with all my heart and soul was going to come back to me and say, "How come you didn't protect me?"
Mhm.
And I was like, "Well, I can't handle that. So we're just going to protect ourselves now." And after I let go of the guilt, I asked him, "What do I do that makes you feel the most loved?" And he said, "When you snuggle me." And I was like, that's the thing that I'm doing the least. When he would come and want to snuggle me, I'd give him maybe 10 seconds and then I would push him away. Or suddenly there'd be something that I need to do that's super important. Um, yeah. And so it's, I'm so grateful that I had A, released the guilt, and B, had this thought of asking him. Essentially, I was asking him what his love language was without using those words. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, the love languages are so powerful.
Oh, so good.
So powerful. Something that we chatted a little bit about on when I was on your podcast, but I think it connects perfectly to mom guilt because we often are, well, I shouldn't say we, but like in the past, I have tried to love people with my love language, and that hasn't been necessarily what they've wanted. And then, like my kids, my husband, and then they were unhappy. And then I was, feeling guilty, like, oh, why am I not doing a better job of giving them what they need? And it was because I really didn't understand what they needed, but I also kind of didn't really understand what I needed. So it just felt like this big old mess.
Hmm.
But then once I learned about the love languages and then I took the quiz, my husband took the quiz, I could see it in my kids what their love languages were. So it made it a little bit easier for me to, I'll say, meet them halfway or meet them in the middle without putting an immense amount of pressure on myself to have it all figured out.
Yeah, and I love the idea because a lot of moms that I've talked about this to don't know their child's love language or even know how to um to navigate it. And I had one client specifically, she's like, I don't, my daughter is so clingy. And it was, kind of driving her nuts because she's like, I need some me time. But like if my kid's awake, she's on my body and that's obnoxious to me. Like I love it, but it's hard too. And I, her daughter was maybe 4 years old, and I said, "Well, what is it that she loves to do with you? Like, ask her, what's the favorite thing?" And it was like playing Barbies or doing tea party or something. And when she started doing that with her daughter intentionally, the clinginess stopped.
Mhm.
And it's so like our children are really, they're just little humans, and if you ask them questions, they'll give you answers. You just gotta you know, form the question in a way that is supportive to their brain development.
Yeah, I love that because I think a lot of times we are afraid to ask questions because we are afraid what the answer might be because we're like, oh gosh, what if I don't know how to do that? But two, we're also afraid to ask the question because then we're afraid maybe that it like gives someone the idea like we don't know, and God forbid we don't know.
Right. Yeah. The I don't know is a big thing. And I think that that contributes a lot to mom guilt too, is like I have to do everything in order to make everybody happy when sometimes the thing that makes them happy is just slowing down and snuggling with them on the couch.
Yes. Yes, but I
Was it
think
you that when we started the podcast, he was sitting on my lap? That
yeah,
was that, yeah. I was
yes, I
like,
was like,
yeah,
oh
that
my
was.
God, so sweet.
Yeah, I told him the other day, I think it was yesterday, I said, like every mom in the world is so jealous of the fact that you're 13 and you still cuddle me. And
Yes,
he's like, why? And I'm like, because teenagers don't usually like to cuddle their mom. They're like, yeah, well, get off. And they sound exactly like that.
yes. Yes, if I even remotely come close, like with my arms extended to hug my kids, they're like, "You're being weird. What are you doing right now?" I'm like, "I just wanted to hug you." They're like, "Well, that's okay." Air hug, like fist bump, like we're good, we're cool. So when I saw him snuggle you, I was like, "Oh, that's the sweetest thing I've ever seen." Uh, so
Yeah, he's just
yeah, I just love it. So, but I think too, it's like you said, we feel like we have to have it all figured out. And when we don't, we feel guilty for that. And I think that's a little bit of programming, maybe societal programming, or maybe we grew up in a house where it felt like the grown-ups didn't have everything figured out. Um, I'm going to pause for 1 second because the cat's knocking on the door. But you
okay.
answered the question, Alicia. I'm just walking, but I can still hear you.
Well, I think that I can actually boil it down to, or I have boiled it down to something very, not too simple, like it, but it is a formula for you. Like you can think of mom guilt as a notification. Like all of our emotions are notifications. If you're angry, it's a notification that you're feeling disempowered, right? So if you're feeling mom guilt, it's a notification that is letting you know that your actions are out of alignment with your values. So most of us aren't walking around with a top 10 list of our values to start with. But, like you said, there's this societal programming. So a lot of us go into parenthood or motherhood thinking, I hated how my parents treated me. I'm going to do the exact opposite.
Yes.
Or I loved how my parents treated me. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. That's more rare. But
Yes.
it's kind of this all or nothing, right?
Yes.
And so when now let's say you loved everything that your mom did, but your mom was a stay-at-home mom, and now you are living in 2025 where two incomes is most of the time mandatory. And so you have to work, or you're a single mom and you have to work outside of the home. And so now your value is a good mom stays at home with her kids, but
Mhm.
you're not doing that. Therefore, I'm not a good mom.
Yes.
That's the connection that's happening. And so, with that thought of I'm not a good mom, then we overcompensate to prove to ourselves that that we are a good mom. And so then we start doing things like I work with a lot of moms that their children are adults now and they're still feeling guilty and they'll like their kid's car breaks down and they're paying for the car because they didn't teach their child about money
Hmm.
when they were younger and they should have done that, air quotes
Yeah.
if you're listening not watching. They should have taught their kid about money, and since they didn't, now they're paying for their kid's car broken down when they don't have the money for it.
Hmm.
And how is that teaching your kid about money?
Yes.
Right? So it's all of these things that lead to like this perpetual I gotta prove myself, I gotta prove that I'm a good mom. When if you went back and you either change the behavior or you
Hmm.
change the rule. So if the behavior is I work outside of the home, can you change the behavior? Do you want to change the behavior? If the answer is no, then we've got to change the rule.
Yes.
So, can a good mom go to work and show her child about what it's like to provide for a family, to fulfill her passion, to provide monetarial things, like show her child the example of putting the physical needs first.
Hmm.
I mean, there's many, many ways that you can reframe that or release that rule or change the rule because that's that rule right there. There's so many is a big one for women. Um, and especially entrepreneurial moms, they're like, oh, I'll work from home, but then we feel guilty when we're working and we feel guilty when we're not.
Yes. Yes. Because I think, because it is 2025, I think there is this expectation that in order to be productive, you have to work outside of the home and do all the things at home, dinner every night, homework every night, 15 extra school activities for your kids, the best clothes, the best shoes, like making sure that you also have the best car, the fancies, like all of these things. And to manage all of that, I'll use the word effectively, um, is really like carrying around like a 50-ton weight on your shoulders because it's just unrealistic for what one person can actually accomplish. And
Mhm.
so letting go of, I think it's wrapped up in the external expectations of what we're supposed to do. And so I love that you mentioned changing values, like making sure it aligns with your value, because perhaps um having a Mercedes is not aligned with your values and you'd be okay to drive a Kia But you think like, oh, in order for people to think that I'm successful in my job and having it all together as a mom, I also have to have the Mercedes. So if you can let go and actually see what aligns, I think that takes such an immense amount of pressure off of us because we can stand comfortably and confidently in the decisions that we're making because we can say, oh, yep, this aligns with my values. Doesn't matter what other people are thinking or saying or, feeling about my decision because this is aligned to my values.
Yeah. And so I wrote a book with 15 of the most popular rules that moms are breaking in order to feel guilty. And it's called Good Mom Rules, Ditch Mom Guilt and Find Your Happy. And in the book, it talks about one of a mom that I had heard of through work where I was for a very short amount of time working for an eviction lawyer.
Oh,
Speaking of not aligning with values, um, and we were talking about why people get into the situation where they're evicted, and he said he always asks. And one mom said, "Well, I had to choose between paying rent and going to the fair, and I went to the fair."
yeah.
And that to me just screamed guilt because I think most of us know that rent is important, but saying no to our kids is hard. And if we feel guilty about saying no to our kids or not having the money and having to say no, then we might make a choice to say yes that's not in alignment for what's best for the household.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and it goes back to that my other client that's paying for her kid's car at 25.
Mhm.
It's all kind of wrapped up in this beautiful guilt package.
Yes. It seems like if we don't follow the formula, it's something that is going to stay with us forever. And I think then that, you know, it, I know as a mom, like in my own journey, I wanted to break the cycle for my kids. There were things that my parents did well, but there were plenty of things that my parents didn't do so well. And in my own healing journey, it was like kind of the things that didn't go so well. It was almost like there was this huge spotlight on them and then I became obsessed with, okay, well, I have to break the cycle because I cannot have this same thing go down for my own kids. But, and I don't want it for their kids or their kids or their kids or their kids. Like I had this projected mindset, like for the next 800 generations, if I don't change now, we're all doomed. And so
No pressure.
no pressure. And there's another really big source of mom guilt because if I can't make it happen now, I've just screwed 8,000 generations of future beings from of my descendants. But I think it's so telling that if we're not able to break the cycle of mom guilt now, and not to say that we won't feel guilt because it's a natural human feeling, but if we don't really break the cycle of always staying in that feeling of mom guilt, it still affects our children as adults, but then our grandkids are going to see that. And then, so it does perpetuate that cycle that we don't want to be perpetuating.
Yeah. And like I said, no pressure because I've had talked to somebody who's like, I want to heal all my wounds before I become a mom. And I was like, that's cute. Um,
That's like that's not how life works.
and let's say you succeeded the second you become a mom, all of the mom trauma files have now opened and all the parenting trauma files have now opened and you have a brand new set of triggers that are going to be um, revealed upon giving birth and for
Yes.
some people upon conception.
Yes. You're like, surprise, here's a new box. Like just when you thought
Yeah,
you had it figured out.
because like you said, that's not how life works.
I mean, wouldn't it be amazing though if it was?
It would be amazing. Yeah.
And like I feel
And
like our planet would be so much better because we would have kids when we were healed and like we wouldn't have things, unhealthy, unserving things to be passing down to them.
yeah. And what's really funny, I don't know why I had kind of this forethought of like none of us get through life unscathed
Yep.
and none of us get through childhood unscathed. And so I knew that I was going to make mistakes And so the little things I think didn't bug me as much, but it was like that one thing was like this huge catalyst. And I've heard so many moms recently, especially the older ones with older children, that the mom guilt doesn't go away. And I'm like, you actually don't have to live with it. My 13-year-old got a concussion last week, and he got said concussion because he was riding his scooter without a helmet and fell. And did I teach him to wear helmets? I did. And so, is that my guilt to carry? Absolutely not, because he's 13 years old and he knows he should be wearing a helmet. And guess what? He's going to wear a helmet regardless for the rest of his life because concussions, they don't feel good. And he's like, I don't want to do that again.
Yes.
So, he learned through a natural consequence. And I think that we undervalue these natural consequences. We think that we have to then now punish him or punish ourselves, right? So somebody's got to get punished and I'm like, the concussion is punishment enough.
Yes, and so I would punish myself, like, especially now that like, now that my girls are older, like, I would definitely take the approach that you've taken with your son, like, you knew you should have put your helmet on, so lesson learned for you, my friend. But with my girls were little and they fell and got hurt, oh my gosh, I would have punished myself relentlessly. I would still be punishing myself, because it's like you feel like you've just let not just your kid down, but yourself down and the rest of the whole world too, even though no one even knows what's going on in your own parenting journey unless you choose to share it with them.
Right. And you can be compassionate or you can feel like sad and emotions for this thing your child got hurt. There's appropriate emotions for my child's hurt. You don't have to pile on with
Yeah.
the guilt. That's not helping anybody.
Yeah, yeah, it just makes the situation that much worse, because then you're beating yourself up and, overcome it. It creates this whole complicated dynamic that doesn't necessarily need to be there, because there are more productive, healthier, serving ways to get through the situation. Um, and I always say, like, if I like, of course, we try to protect our kids, but I also, like you, have to keep in check that life will happen and they will have, bumps and bruises and scrapes and trials and tribulations. And those are the things that help them become resilient later in life so that they can be independent and only come to us as when they absolutely need to when they're adults.
Yeah. And you touched on a really, I think, important thing is like we want to, because we've experienced hurt in our life and we're probably still carrying that hurt around with us because a lot of us are walking around with our wounds still bleeding. We want to protect our kids from any kind of anything. But if you look at these wounds that happened to you, and you learn from them and you see how there's pieces of the puzzle that were connected or that connect when you look at your life as a whole, that some of these things you learned from, and like I've had a series of jobs that have led me to this job and all of those jobs I picked up skills that led me to have the skills that I have as a coach. And had I not gone through those things, like sometimes I think, man, I really wish I hadn't left that job. Like that was the stupidest mistake I ever made. But if I hadn't left that job, I probably would be living in Washington, D.C., and then I never would have met my son's dad, and so on and so forth. Like, there's, if you look for those kinds of things in your history, you'll see how this led to that and led to that and led to that to the thing that you have now that you love.
Yes.
And when we try to protect our kids from all of these things, we're protecting them from things that might lead to other things, that might lead to other things, that might lead to something that makes them happy.
Yes. And that could be something amazing.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I know like the concept of letting go of mom guilt might seem a little airy, hard to pin down, easier said than done. Oh, would work for you or Kim or my sister or my sister-in-law, but never for me. So if someone has that feeling of like, yeah, but I just don't even know where to start. What is like one small takeaway, one small step that they can use now, in alignment with your formula, or maybe something outside of that that would help them be like, yep, I'm gonna shed that mom guilt, even if it's just for this one time.
I mean, if you go like the mom guilt is a notification and not a life sentence. And if you can take that and remember it and use the formula, then you'll see that there's an exception to every rule. That's the part that is really hard, is that we have these rules and we feel like 100% of the time we have to follow these rules. But even if, you were to murder someone in self-defense, that's an exception to murder. It's not murder anymore. It's self-defense, right? They have in the court of law, we have exceptions to rules. It's not black and white. And so you've got to give yourself that grace to find the exception to the rule, like I did with my son. It didn't change the fact that this happened, but it did change how I was holding on to the responsibility of it. Like I didn't have a crystal ball. Had I known what was going to happen, I would have made different choices, but I didn't. And so I think that if you're hearing that and you're still like, yeah, that I'm going to hold on to my mom guilt forever, that's when you reach out to me, because like prove me wrong that all guilt is releasable.
Yes. And I think just the what you said, you're like, it's not a life sentence. I was like, oh yes, like that was like goosebumps good.
Hmm. That
Yeah.
just popped into my head one day. Somebody posted, in Facebook groups, they're always like, say one thing that your clients don't know or whatever. And that just popped out and I was like, ooh, that was good.
That was good. That's like the one that you want to chisel in stone.
100%. Like that's going on my website.
That might even be tattoo worthy. Like it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I just think that is like such a beautiful place to end this episode, is to know that mom guilt does not have to be a life sentence, and we don't have to do all the things in order to feel no guilt, because even if we do all the things, there's still going to be something that makes us feel guilty. So like take the pressure off and allow yourself to breathe a little bit. And so if you are interested, I don't know about but I'm like such a book nerd. So I'm like, "Ooh, books? Yes, please." Like I mean obviously because I have shelves of books behind me. Not
Mhm.
all are mine, some are my kids and some are my husband's, but
You got empty space up there.
I know. And there, I have books upstairs too. So like there are, and I have books in my client space. So like we're running out of room with books. But the joke is that if we bring any more books in the house, it's like going to collapse the house because the weight of the books is just too much. But um, so I will put all the links for Alicia's books, her podcast, her website, her social channels in the show notes. So if you are struggling with mom guilt and you feel like you need help, please reach out to Alicia. I'm going to speak on your behalf, Alicia. Be like, yes, it's perfectly fine to message her on social media or shoot her an email.
100%.
I'm sure she would enjoy that. So, thank you so much, Alicia, for taking the time to tune in with us and for being up extra early, because Alicia's in California and I'm on the East Coast. So it's only 6:46 her time. So,
I'm an early bird. It's okay.
well, it was so great chatting with you again, and I feel like we'll have to chat again soon.
Absolutely.
Enjoy
Thanks for
your
having
day
me.
and so much, of course.